I've designed two quite similar looking scarves recently. What they have in common is that both of them have a diamond cable and both use the Wanderlust cable technique. It's a way of making cables that look very big but are in fact a series of very small cable crosses, so that makes them very much more workable for looms than cables that have multiple stitches crossed in a single row. But here's the difference. The one on the left is for double knitting boards only. It is what is called an embossed cable, and this particular version of embossed cable is only possible on a double knitting board. As far as I know, not by hand and definitely not by machine. To briefly explain to my machine knitting friends, the pegs for this version of embossed cable can oppose perfectly. You cannot do that with machine needles and two beds. For this design, we're going to keep the scarf from rolling with these tucked purl stitches. For this project, the knit side of those tucked purls will show on the purl side of the fabric, which is the right side. So they're here, 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 and here on the board away from us. I'm going to call that the back board. I must pause briefly here and confess that I made a mistake. I thought those 4 columns would be adequate to stop the roll, and they were not. Counting in from each edge of the work, as I'm demonstrating, you will see me make tucked purls on stitch number 2 and stitch number 4. I had to go back after the scarf was finished and add them on stitch 6 from each edge. So that resulted in another video on doing them after the fact. So the program notes will contain a link to this video, which tells you how to do that. If you prefer to, you may do it for all the tuck rib columns, or you may work the tuck rib columns as you knit on pegs number 2, 4, and 6 from each edge. They will be worked on the back board or the board away from you on a double knitting board. Let's talk about setup now. I'm using bulky number 5 yarn, 24 stitches across a 5/8 inch peg spaced board. I began my scarf with knit 1, purl 1, rib. You could also choose garter stitch or seed stitch. I do suggest that you use at least 1 inch of it, but it could be much, much more at the beginning of the scarf and at the end. I'm not going to go into extreme detail about casting on and binding off because you are experienced knitters and you're going to know your favorite. I prefer to cast on in a chain stitched method and bind off in a chain stitched method for a nice match. Using a double knitting board, any stitches on the board nearest you will be knit stitches. Any stitches made on the opposing board will be purl stitches. So this is how we allocate the 24 stitches after completing whatever hem we use. Transfer those marked P to the back board, leave those marked K on the near board. You'll just wrap and knit every peg as though making a knit stitch. But because those on the back board are facing the opposite direction, they will in fact be purl stitches. These boards are set up so that the pegs oppose one another perfectly. The pegs on the board nearest me are making the knit stitches for this design. The pegs on the farther board are making the purl stitches. After finishing your ribbing, move the stitches around so that pegs 2, 4, and 6 on the back board all have stitches on them. Pegs 1, 3, 5, and 7 on the front board all have stitches on them. And counting inward from the edge to the 7s, all the stitches between the 7s are also on the front board. And to make them tuck, I'm slipping the first stitch of this row, so one of the tucked purls is the very first stitch. And I'm going to wrap it but not knit it every time we're going from right to left. Then knit across in whatever portion of the design we're in at that point. I've now reached this stitch. It gets wrapped but not knitted. The front board stitch gets wrapped and knitted. This is this one wrapped and not knitted. Last front board stitch gets knitted. What makes it tucked is that collection of a spare loop. Now, knitting back from left to right, we're going to knit both of those loops over. The wrap is completely normal. Wrap, lift 2 loops, knit them both over, and then continue on with whatever portion of the pattern we're in. You could use this edging on a great many stitches, but today I'm using it on this diamond cable. Now let's talk about working the diamond. The sample on the left is not this scarf. It's where I am working it into a sweater front made in panels. So the diamond is the same as what you see me knitting, but you also see a little bit of another cable. After completing the hem, we create the beginning of the diamond by creating 2 stitches, both of them on the back board. On every row that we knit right to left, we'll just wrap and knit those 2 stitches wherever they happen to be. On rows where we're moving from left to right, those stitches will get moved around. At first, they will get crossed twice to make the beginning of the cable. Then they will be moved apart by 1 peg at a time. Each stitch will get moved by 1 peg at a time until there are 8 knit stitches in between them. Then they'll gradually get moved back together. Because the yarn is wrapped continuously from peg to peg, including those on the backboard, the fabric is complete. We have reached this stitch, so we'll wrap the peg, knit 2 loops over, wrap the front peg, knit over, wrap the back peg, knit 2 loops over, and the entire project will be edged in the same manner, alternating those 2 rows. I forgot to move this stitch right after knitting it. This one moved from the left to its present position, and now I'm moving one from right to left. These 2 stitches are now in the center, and on the next left to right pass, we will knit them and then cross them. Here's the pattern stitch. Slip the first stitch, wrap the first 3 or 4, and as I showed you already, don't knit over on the backboard. Now wherever the 2 stitches are on the backboard, we're going to knit up to them. Up to and including the peg that's opposite the peg holding the first stitch. I'm going to wrap both of them since they're side by side, knit them off together, and then wrap and knit the peg behind. On right to left rows, there are no cable crosses and no stitches are moved. We just knit. Here I'm up to the trim stitches again, and because this is a right to left row, I do not knit over the backboard stitches. I just let them collect a wrap. Moving left to right, I do knit them over, 2 loops over the top one, and work the near board, front board stitches normally, working up to and including the peg opposite the first one that is on the opposing board. I'm going to wrap and knit those 2 stitches. Since they're both at the center right now, they can be knitted in series. That won't always be the case. Now we're going to make a cable. All cabling occurs on left to right rows. Lift both stitches, trade places. It does not matter which one is first, but it does matter that you do it the same every time. knit on over to the edging, 2 loops over 1. Now there's another right to left row in which loops are gathered on these 4 edging pegs. All the other pegs on the near board are knitted off normally. The 2 stitches on the back board are still side by side, so we can wrap and knit them in series. Return row as usual, slip the first stitch, 2 loops over 1 on the 2 trim pegs, knit over 2 and including the peg that opposes the first one where there is a stitch on the opposing board. This is row 4 and it's a repeat of row 2. Again, after knitting the 2 center stitches on the backboard, we lift them and trade places. Make the same directional trade as last time. Finish the rest of row 4 as all the other rows are finished. Row 5. The right to left row is knitted as always, wrapping and knitting every stitch where it lies, except those involved in the trim, which are wrapped but not knitted. Row 6. Knit up to the center where there are 2 stitches on the backboard. These are still positioned so we can wrap in the same manner. This is the last time they will be in that position for a while. Because after we knit them over, and also the following stitch on the near board I find to be the best way, we're going to move them apart. So the legs of the diamond are beginning to separate, and unlike traditional cables, this is very easy on a knitting board and doesn't strain anything. The rest of the row is knitted in the same manner that we have been doing it. Now, other left to right rows from here on out are going to be like this one, in that we will wrap and knit these stitches where they are and then move them progressively out to here. Every other row, every left to right row, there'll be a move. If I had 28 rather than the 24 I do have, or even 36 for a shawl, and I wanted my diamonds to be bigger, they can just keep moving out and then gradually move back in again. All right to left rows from henceforth are worked the same, with the slight difference that the legs of the diamond will have their stitches in different positions from row to row. As you approach wherever those pegs are, knit up to and including the peg opposite, then wrap the peg involved in the leg of the diamond and knit it. Then knit over to near the next peg, but not up to and including to the peg before, because what we want is for the wrap of the yarn to be symmetrical. You'll still be able to see the shape that the yarn traced looking at the previous peg that involved the diamond leg, and that's what you want to reproduce on the second side. If you look down carefully, you can see the yarn path, and it's symmetrical going around this peg, across the front pegs, and around that peg. Here's a summary of how to wrap the yarn to knit off for each row. Row 1, moving right to left, knit up to the center, wrap the pegs in the order that the fingers are indicating, and then finish the remainder of the row. Row 2, wrap and knit everything normally, cross the 2 center stitches that are on the back board. Remember whether you went right over left or left over right, because you'll want to do that every time those 2 stitches are crossed. Row 3 is a repeat of row 1, right to left. Row 4 is a repeat of row 2, again crossing the 2 center stitches. Row 5 is just like rows 1 and 3. Row 6, after knitting those 2 center stitches, move them apart. So there are now 2 empty pegs on the backboard between them. Row 7, wrap and knit all of the pegs that are in use, including the stitches that have moved apart, wrap them in their new positions and knit them over. Row 8, wrap and knit them where they are, then move them apart again. There are now 4 pegs empty between the working pegs on the backboard. Row 9, right to left, wrap everything where it is and knit over. And throughout all this, all the right to left rows, you're continuing to make the tuck trim on the 6 pegs, 3 on each end of the backboard. So of course, on the right to left rows, they collect loops, but you don't knit those over. Row 10, wrap and knit everything where it is, but then move the 2 stitches on the backboard farther apart one more time. Those stitches now have 6 empty pegs between them. On row 11, we wrap and knit as usual, but add 2 pegs to the mix. These are used to knit the mini cable in the center of each diamond. Wrapping the 2 center pegs as shown is also how we create the beginning of the diamond on the very first row 1. You won't have to do it again because those diamond stitches will continue to be worked throughout the project. But on row 1, this is what you'll do to start off. And then again on row 11, you will do that on the center 2 pegs as the start of the mini cable. This is a nice but optional detail. If you'd rather keep it a simple diamond cable, just don't do that step. Row 12, moving left to right, is wrapped like this. Then these stitches are moved apart for the final time, leaving 8 pegs between. This time they're not all empty. Knit the 2 center pegs and cross them in the same direction that you crossed to begin the diamond. Row 13, moving right to left. Wrap everything as it falls, just as shown here. Row 14, knit off the stitches, then move the 2 outer ones towards each other, leaving 6 pegs between them, and cable the 2 center stitches again. Row 15, wrap and knit everything as it is. 16, wrap and knit, then move the 2 outer stitches towards one another again, and move the 2 that have been creating the mini cable to the front board. They're going to be retired for now until the next row 11. Moving them means that when you wrap row 17, there will be 2 stitches on each front center peg. Knit both loops off. Row 18, moving left to right, wrap and knit the stitches as they are, then move the 2 on the backboard towards each other again. Row 19, right to left, wrap and knit all stitches as they are. Row 20, moving left to right, wrap and knit, then move the 2 stitches on the backboard towards each other so they're side by side again. And we're ready to start with row 1. In bulky yarn, each diamond motif is likely to be about 4 inches long. So to get a 48-inch scarf, you could knit 11 of them, which would be 44 inches, and then 2 inches of ribbing at each end, which would make your 48. But of course, you can actually knit to any length that suits you. I do suggest that you repeat rows 1 to 5 of the pattern at the very end of the scarf so that the 2 scarf ends are symmetrical and both look like this. Well, this isn't a beginner thing to do. It's also not very difficult. And once you learn to create the diamond cable, you can use it in bigger projects. Here I have paired the diamond cable panel with another panel, and that's a separate video. And I'm working on a sweater back. There are several related videos to this one that will help you with some of the skills. In the program notes, you will find links to all of them to help your work go smoothly.